This is the Cycling Over 60 podcast, Season 2, Episode 12. Is Chicago a cycling vacation destination? I'm your host, Tom Butler. I am now on a journey to get ready to take on a new challenge for this season. My plan is to ride across the state of Washington. That will be somewhere around 400 miles that I plan to do in 5 days. There are a few things that I need to focus on to make this happen, but last week, there is one of those things that has taken center stage. I've been wearing a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM for short, for over a week now. It has been eye-opening. What it has shown is that I am not healthy. I'm certainly not on my deathbed. I am not even in bad shape, but I am seeing with the CGM that I have a real problem. I have never been diagnosed as type 2 diabetic, but I have been considered pre-diabetic for years now. However, seeing the data from the CGM, my body is not handling glucose in a healthy way. The most concerning data is how my glucose is spiking. I believe that my glucose is getting high enough that it is affecting my health in numerous ways. Now, I really need to seek some expert input on this, but there's a lot of information about what happens when glucose spikes. Here's my biggest question. It seems like high blood glucose levels can interfere with my ability to build muscle. If true, this means that in addition to age-related reduced muscle building, I have an additional obstacle. What I have found this week from the CGM data is that the spikes in my glucose are very stubborn. I'm being very careful with my food intake, and I'm being very consistent with exercise after meals to try and impact the post-meal spikes. However, I've only barely impacted the spikes. I think I am in a long battle to control it. I was given 7 keys to reducing the spikes. They are exercise, sleep, stress management, waist size, which is an assessment of visceral fat, weight, plant-based diet, which is a focus on getting enough fiber, and strength training. I will certainly be focused on these 7 things. In particular, I'm focused on weight loss and upper body strength training. I think it is a shame that a diagnosis of diabetes is needed to get a CGM paid for by insurance. I would love to hear any stories where someone has gotten a CGM covered without a diabetes diagnosis. My A1C is 6.4, which is the high end for a pre-diabetes diagnosis. But the CGM shows that while my average blood glucose is not terrible, the spikes I am experiencing are really unhealthy. If you have an A1C over 6.0 and you can swing the cost, I would certainly recommend doing what I am doing. Get a CGM for 3 months and see what you can learn about managing your levels. I certainly wish I would have done this years ago. As we get farther in the fall, I've been thinking about cold weather gear. I realize in the Seattle area, we don't really get cold winters. Last year, there was only one day that weather kept me from riding, and that was because of snow, not really the cold. The 10-year average temperature for Seattle in December is 46 degrees. For January and February, both are 48 degrees. So that's not really cold. And it got me thinking about areas that have real winter conditions to deal with. Chicago came to mind because I grew up in that area. It made me curious about the cycling scene in Chicago, and I got connected with John Lastovicka from the Chicago Cycling Club. I got very intrigued about what John would have to say about Chicago's cycling culture, but as you hear, I also felt like John could share an educated perspective on how to entice more people to jump on a bike. Here is our conversation. I put a message out on the Chicago Cycling Club and I got a response. I'm really happy to welcome John Lastovicka, who was the one that responded to my message. Thanks, John, for joining me.
My pleasure.
I like to start out this way. Tell me your earliest experiences with bicycling.
My earliest experience. I must have been, 6 or 7 years old, and I was jonesing to get a bike. And my dad comes home from work one day, and he says, "John, you got a bike. Come to the garage. Let's take a look at it." So I go to the garage, and he opens up the trunk of the car. And there's these 2 cardboard boxes with this wreck bike. I was crushed. But, over the next, it seemed like it took forever, but it was probably 3-4 weeks. every evening and during the days and the weekends, I learned how to repair and maintain bicycles under my dad's direction, and him indeed doing most of the work. I learned how to turn a piece of scrap into a bike that I rode for, maybe 8 years or so. It was a 3-speed motor baton, and I learned a lot of mechanical skills. And during the summer, I worked as a volunteer bike mechanic at a bike co-op in Chicago, a place called Working Bikes. And I use some of those skills to this day. So
That's fantastic.
yeah. My dad was a wise guy, smart man,
Yeah. Well, you are now in the cycling over 60 age group by a few years.
Yeah, you bet.
and you've stuck with cycling over the years.
Well, things have sort of waxed and waned.
Okay.
I probably did my first century when I was in my teens, and I rode in college. But hey, then I got real serious about my career, and that took a hit. Although I was able to commute by bike, and then maybe I do some occasional long rides. But then, in my late 20s, early 30s, kids arrived, and then boy, that except for the commuting, that put a real hiatus on the riding. But
right.
It's good to be retired.
Yes. Okay. And so you came back to it in retirement, and it sounds like you do quite a few miles every year. What brought you back to it?
I've always enjoyed it, and I really, found, hey, I've got more of an opportunity. I was, really happy that an interest that I've always had that I could, throw myself into again. I never led rides in the past, but now I find that's something that I'm doing. And, I enjoy the planning in the logistics, and hey, people seem to have a good time on the rides, and that's good. Plus, I get to choose where we go and where we meet, and that's fun too.
Nice. One of the things that you have mentioned you've done is the RAGBRAI.
Yes.
The registers annual, I can't remember what RAGBRAI stands for right now.
Annual Great Bicycle Ride Across Iowa. And this year was the 50th year of that adventure.
Now, I can't imagine it. I'm trying to picture, someplace I read 50,000 bicyclists.
Well, look, I think that's an exaggeration.
Okay.
I think this year they were trying to do 100,000 riders in Des Moines, and then there were concerns about the safety of that. Then they cut it down to 50,000. Here's the reality. I think this year maybe there were. This is an educated guess. Maybe 15,000 week-long riders.
Okay.
And I was a week-long rider. And then there are people who will buy a ticket for a couple of days. I've met people from Arizona. They were born in Iowa. They'll come out and they'll ride in their hometown area, for 1 or 2 days. And so, in addition to the 16,000 or so people that are out there for the full 7 days, every day there's going to be additional registered riders. And then there's plus an awful lot of abandoned, unregistered riders. This is all on public roads, and there's nothing to stop anybody from, just riding along. I mean, the only difference is they don't have a wristband, and they wouldn't be eligible for some of the RAGBRAI services. For example, the sag wagon.
Right. Now, some of these towns that you're rolling through in Iowa, I imagine there's some small towns there along the way.
Mm-hmm.
That must be something for those communities to have, even 15,000, 16,000 people come rolling in.
Yeah. So let's say if there's 18,000 riders, like the team that I've ridden with for the past 8 years, we have a crew. So there's people supporting those riders.
Okay.
And so there could be 25,000 people in a town of maybe 5,000. And for many of these small towns, this is the biggest single economic event ever in a 24-hour period. A lot of communities will fight and petition
Mm.
a lot, to be an overnight town, to be a pass-through town. I mean, look, every single Girl Scout troop, every Boy Scout troop, every church, they're selling spaghetti dinners, they're selling pie, homemade ice cream, homemade barbecue, breakfast burritos. I mean, this is a great fundraiser,
Yeah.
for the organizations, whether they be, kids organizations like Girl Scouts, or it's the volunteer fire department, that's staffed by adults. Lodging, you have to be very creative. I mean, whatever the hotels or motels, they're oversubscribed. I mean, as soon as the route is announced in January, probably the next day for the date that the ride goes through the overnight towns, everything's gone.
Right.
And so just to give you ideas how creative the team that I ride with is, they've been doing this for 25 years. They're called Cubs, Chicago Urban Bicycle Society. And so we like to stay in funeral homes,
Okay.
museums, libraries. Think about funeral homes. They're very quiet.
Right.
Customers, are not noisy.
Right.
They have fabulous air conditioning. I mean, literally any place that can provide us with showers, a roof over our head, and ideally air conditioning, we'll take. This year, our first night we were in an aviation museum in the town of Sergeant Bluff, just outside of Sioux City, where the ride started on the Missouri River. When we went through Ames, Iowa, we stayed at which is the home of Iowa State University. We stayed at the Alpha Phi sorority house. We had real mattresses.
Okay.
When we were in the museum, I traveled with a inflatable air mattress. We just set up on the floor of the museum. So yeah, when 25,000 riders and their support people come to town, it overwhelms the town. But the towns are ready, and not just any town can do this. I mean, they have to document and show to the Des Moines Register that they have the resources to be able to take care of, this many people.
There's a lot of questions I could ask about that, but I do want to turn to, tell me about the cycling culture in Chicago.
I would say it's pretty healthy, and there's something for everybody. I'm a member of the Chicago Cycling Club, and they probably do maybe a half a dozen organized rides a year. I mentioned the Cubs, Chicago Urban Bicycle Society, which is a group that exists just to ride RAGBRAI. We're based here in Chicago. I'm also active in working as a volunteer mechanic at a cycling co-op in the West Side called Working Bikes. And last year, I think we collected 18,000 unwanted bikes from all over the Chicago area. And by Chicago area, that goes as far north as Madison, Wisconsin, to as far south as South Bend, Indiana. And we collected 18,000 unwanted bikes. Maybe about 14,000 of those were fixed up and sent overseas to third world countries, San Salvador, Jordan, places like Niger, places where bicycles are not recreation, but they are a means of serious transportation. I mean, there's lots of clubs and there's lots of rides. I mean, we are blessed with hundreds of miles of pretty good cycling paths. You can ride on a cycling path from Chicago to New Buffalo, Michigan, and you're not out on the road very much. That's 100 miles along Lake Michigan. I did that this summer with two other guys, and we were prepping for RAGBRAI. We took Amtrak back to Chicago, the same day. And you can go up north into Wisconsin. There's trails that will take you up into Kenosha and Milwaukee. Chicago has a phenomenal forest preserve system. For example, this Thursday, the senior group is going to be riding up the Des Plaines River bicycle trail, starting at about Lake Forest, and we're going to be heading north towards Wisconsin. I think we'll probably only do about 20 miles north and then come back. I mean, there's all types of trails. There's all types of great, interesting places to see. A couple of weeks ago, I led a series of rides that took us along the I&M Canal corridor. We started at a place where sometime in the late, I think, either 1600s or 1700s, two French explorers discovered a waterway connection between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River Basin. And we went to that portage site, and they had the idea of building a canal to link Lake Michigan and the Mississippi drainage system. 150 years later, there was a canal. We ended up riding part of that canal path out to Joliet, Illinois. And I think from Joliet, it goes another 30 miles west. But we haven't done that section yet. Hey, got to leave something for next year to do. I would say that cycling culture is alive and well. I mean, there's a critical mass ride from downtown that attracts thousands of riders. It's the last Friday of every month, and we'll circle around the Daily Plaza. It's technically an illegal act.
Okay.
We just take over. When 2,000 cyclists go through a stoplight, it takes 5-6 minutes.
Right.
To clear that intersection. And I mean, we're there we are on Washington Boulevard and Michigan Avenue. Right in the heart of downtown Chicago.
How would you characterize the city of Chicago as far as do they embrace cycling? Are they embracing traffic solutions that make it comfortable for cyclists? How would you rate that?
I grew up in the Chicago area. I left when I was 18. At that time, the idea of living and riding a bicycle in downtown Chicago would just curdle my blood.
Right.
It's completely different today. I ride the Loop every day. The Loop is the part of the downtown area of Chicago that's surrounded by a circle of elevated electric trains. I ride in the Loop all the time, and there's bicycle lanes. Some of the streets are literally like a bicycle expressway. We have our own traffic lights, own lanes, and I mean, you still got to be careful. But I'd say the city has done a hell of a job, going from something that was really anti-cyclist, dangerous, to something that's pretty good. Rahm Emanuel, who was the mayor, 2 mayors ago, he was a cyclist, and that helped. The day that he left office, he didn't go to Lori Lightfoot's swearing in. He was on his bicycle riding around Lake Michigan.
Wow. That's great. That's great. I mean, that is helpful for sure.
Yeah. I think a lot of the stuff in the recent past that the city has put in wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Rahm.
Gotcha. The Chicago Cycling Club, is there an advocacy aspect of the club? Are they advocating for?
Well, okay, there is a group called the Alliance for Active Transportation Advocacy or something like that. This is the group that sponsors Bike to Drive, which I know you were interested in.
Yeah.
They are the advocacy group. I'm never quite sure exactly, what they're doing, but I mean, they're fighting the good fight.
Okay.
I think part of what's happening is adding not only quantity, but also upgrading the lanes from just painted stripes to installing barriers, curb barriers, separating the cyclists from the traffic. And, that's not always popular to the residents.
Right.
Because, hey, they like it. Nobody wants change.
Right.
They like things the way it was when they moved in. But, I mean, slowly but surely, things are changing. And the Active Alliance group, at least from what I can see, they seem to be the group that's on point on that cause.
So you mentioned Bike the Drive. I am, like you said, I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful event.
What is that like? If you could first just talk about what does it mean when it says the drive?
Yeah, good question. So Lakeshore Drive is this limited access boulevard that goes for 16 miles up and down the lakefront. Now, one of the things that is very unique about the city of Chicago is that whole 16-mile stretch of the lakefront belongs to the public.
Hmm.
It's all parkland. And growing up here, I sort of took that for granted.
Right.
But you go to downtown Seattle, there's no miles and miles and miles of views of Puget Sound or the Pacific or
Right.
whatever you guys are adjacent to. I've been fortunate enough to travel all over the world, Italy, Australia, Japan, Korea, and trust me, what we have in Chicago, it's exceptional. So first of all, you have this divided lane boulevard, limited access boulevard that goes along this beautiful stretch of Lake Michigan. And to the uninitiated, if you don't know it's a lake, it's like an ocean. It's huge.
Right.
I mean, up here where I'm sitting on the 60th floor, I mean, I can see actually, I'm looking southeast, and I can actually see smokestacks of steel mills in Indiana. But I mean, if you're at car level, it's an ocean. But anyhow, Lakeshore Drive has been renamed Jean-Baptiste du Sabot, a Lakeshore Drive, in honor of the founder of the city of Chicago, who was a black Haitian fur trader that had a trading post at the mouth of the Chicago River. But anyhow, so Bike the Drive is an event where you pay a fee, depending on what type of a coupon code you have. Maybe you're paying $60 or maybe less. And that gives you the ability to be out on Lakeshore Drive without any cars. Cars are banned from roughly 5:30, 6 a.m. to I think it's all over with at noon. But practically speaking, it's like from 6 a.m. to maybe 10:30. And I mean, there's tens of thousands of riders that are out there, and it's basically 30-mile, 32-mile loop. It goes from 56th Street, where the Museum of Science and Industry is on the south side, to I think, does it go up to the Hollywood turn, or maybe it just goes to Foster Avenue on the north side. I mean, there's families out there. There's people who haven't ridden the bike for a decade or more. There's people on unicycles. I mean, but the great thing is for that morning in September, cyclists and bicycles rule the road. There's no cars, and it's wonderful to be out there.
It must be a bit of a cycling festival.
Yeah. It is. I mean, in Grant Park, this is the site of the Lollapalooza Music Festival right downtown. There is a festival set up where there's bands. You can do a pancake breakfast. There's all types of vendors, all types of cycling organizations. Evanston Bike Club will be promoting their Century Ride, or Working Bikes, the bike co-op that I mentioned. We'll have a booth talking about our mission and our need for volunteers. But yeah, there's a festival afterwards as well.
There's the Bike the Drive event. There's you talked a lot about Lake Michigan and how beautiful that is, and biking around Lake Michigan. I actually grew up very close to New Buffalo, so I know exactly where that is.
Yeah.
And so, would you say that Chicago should be a travel destination for cyclists?
Absolutely. Hey, I have some friends who rode RAGBRAI this year. These are people that I ride with in Arizona, and they came out about a week before we were going to take off for RAGBRAI. They cycled during that week, and they've decided they want more. I mean, they're actively looking for a place to buy in the city.
Nice.
I think Chicago may not have the cycling reputation of the Pacific Northwest. I mean, I tend to think of a place like Portland as having a long, deep tradition of being a pro cycling place. I think Chicago has been late to get to its current state, but I think they're doing a pretty good job. I don't know where Chicago ranks in like the top 10 bicycling cities according to Bicycling Magazine, but I think it's probably a top 10 city. I'm just guessing. I mean, if they're not, hey, we're trying. Things are better than the way I remember things 50, 60 years ago.
And it seems like that's an important thing, that there's the progress being made. I mean, it is a big city, obviously, and so change, I think, is harder in a bigger city because there's a lot more moving parts.
To be honest, I mean, a lot of it has been developed to serve businesses in Chicago, where you have these high-tech businesses and you have these engineers, young engineers. How do you make working in Chicago as attractive as working in San Francisco, for example? And so I think a lot of the stuff that was done, the bike lanes, the bike share system, and so forth, was done in part to support the recruiting efforts of Chicago businesses or businesses that Chicago wanted to attract.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
And it's a good thing.
Yeah.
We live in a high rise right downtown, stone's throw from the lake, and we don't have a car. We don't miss it. Public transportation and bicycle and our feet works just fine.
Now, one thing that you do have in Chicago that we don't really have here in the Seattle area is legitimate winter. We'll start complaining if it hits the upper 30s here. That's too cold. So is that something that brings bicycling to a halt, or are people there adapting to cycling in the winter? How does that work?
Well, look, you have to understand that I'm a resident of Arizona, and I mean that's where I vote. That's where I pay my state taxes. I'm only in Chicago for 5 months. So my answer to winter is I leave at Halloween.
Right.
Okay. But although I left the Chicago area when I was 18, I stayed in the state at the University of Illinois until I was 28. And University of Illinois is in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, about 150 miles due south of Chicago. And it would get nasty. And as a younger man, hey, I'd ride 12 months a year. I found I had to be very careful with my extremities. So feet and hands. I think I started with really good socks, and then I learned about plastic bags. I think finally the best solution that I came up with was wetsuit booties, neoprene booties, and gloves. As long as you're pedaling, you stay warm.
Right.
It's where the blood really isn't circulating too, and those extremities that are, out there in the wind, that you have to manage. Now, most of the people that I ride with here in Chicago, I hear stories of them going to spinning studios.
Okay.
In the winter.
Right.
I mean, for the at least some of the very, very strong riders that I know that I ride with, that's how they're keeping it up. I do know that the organized ride calendar for the Chicago Cycling Club, it's going to shut down in a month or so. It's not going to start up until the late spring.
Gotcha.
I can tell you my own experience. I'm not exactly quite sure what people are doing, but I can tell that there's a lot of people that are commuting into downtown where I live, for their jobs. They're not taking public transportation. They're not walking. They're not driving, and they're depending on that bike. And, I'm sure those people, maybe they don't have fenders on their bikes now, but they probably do in the winter.
Right.
They'll be all bundled up.
I want to make a bit of a shift here because there is an aspect of your background that I think is very interesting that I want to tap into a bit. You are an emeritus professor at Arizona State University.
Right, which basically means I'm retired.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. Yeah.
So, could you talk a bit about your academic interests?
Yeah, sure. I am a consumer researcher, and I was trained in behavioral science, quantitative analysis, and marketing at the University of Illinois. I've worked in universities for 50 years or so. I mean, starting as a graduate student, and then moving to becoming a professor. My interest was what makes people buy things, and how can we figure out ways to help you buy our product or buy more of our product. It was an awful lot of fun.
I want to have you apply kind of that frame of reference to people buying into something, not necessarily buying something, but people buying into an idea.
Right.
And so, okay, so the American public is in love with cars.
Yep, you bet.
And can you envision a message or a way that would promote to a broad American audience parking the car and getting on a bike?
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's any simple message or ad, that you could put together. But I do think that you just need to have a coordinated effort of some messaging, but also an infrastructure that makes it possible for people to get out of that car, to make cycling a viable option. And I think a lot of that stuff is infrastructure related. I was fortunate enough to be a visiting professor in Belgium, probably about 30 years ago, at the Catholic University of Leuven. And Leuven is an old medieval town, and the university was inside of this medieval town. Not an easy place to drive your car to begin with. An exceptionally difficult place to park your car in. And so, bicycles were ubiquitous and automobiles were really exceptional. And there was a great bicycling infrastructure in Belgium. And I remember that was the first time that I had ever encountered dedicated bicycle stoplights at intersections in my life. And hey, I smiled. I like that. There were dedicated lanes and lanes that were managed for automobile traffic with more than painted lines. I think there's a story that can be told where it may actually be a time saver, to ride your bike. It may actually be cheaper for you to ride your bike, than to deal with traffic and paying for parking. But I think, this is not something that's going to happen overnight. I think it's, in some ways it's like, the shift to electric cars. People are not only in love with their cars, but, they're in love with gasoline cars, and they can't understand, how am I going to make this work if there's only 250 miles of range, in the battery, and where do I charge it, and so forth. I think that that's something that is changing. It's not changing on a wholesale basis, but certainly in Chicago, I see hundreds, thousands of people commuting into work every day into downtown Chicago. 30, 40 years ago, it wouldn't have been that number. So, I think there's an interest there, but, there needs to be an infrastructure to permit it. I know I did some research decades ago for the United States Department of Transportation. And at that time, we were developing and testing ad campaigns to deter people from drinking and driving. And, I wonder, what the U.S. Department of Transportation is doing. Certainly when states and towns are putting in roads in order to accept matching funds from the feds, I'm pretty sure that the feds have put in requirements that there has to be parallel cycling lanes and, provisions made for parking bikes and so forth.
What I'm hearing you say is that there is infrastructure. And if we have policies that are in place that get infrastructure in place, that's almost the first level to get someone to consider getting out on a bike or maybe taking the bike to the grocery store or whatever.
Right. I would say, for the average person,
yeah,
that's the case. I think it has to be feasible. It has to be a reasonable alternative. Change is difficult. People universally have a difficult time viewing a world that is different than their own experience. If your experience is you have your own garage, you have your own vehicle, you drive your own vehicle to work, to shopping, to entertainment, it's hard to see options other than that.
I think I'm a good example, actually perfect example. I just got a continuous glucose monitor because I wanted to see what was going on because I'm right on the border of diabetes. Mm-hmm. And if I had spent more time on a bike, I've gotten back on a bike in the last year, but if I had spent more time on a bike, it would have been an excellent way for me to kind of impact some of the lifestyle diseases that I was struggling with.
Sure.
It seems like that is a particular message. And I'm wondering, does that message that it can save your life, bicycle could save your life, or that message of anything can save your life, does that play from a consumer perspective?
Sure. But I think, we need to be advocating bicycling on all types of fronts. Gotcha. I didn't talk about the health benefits. I think one of the things that I failed to mention in my own story is, maybe 20 years ago, during an annual checkup, I was told, God, John, your cholesterol is outrageous. We got to do something. we need to put you on statins. And I didn't want to take any medications. And I remember they said, well, okay, if you say you're going to bicycle more and you're going to change your diet, we'll give that a shot. Come back in 6 months. And damn it if I didn't hit the jackpot. Nice. All of a sudden that cholesterol dropped like a stone. Truth is, I was eating pretty badly. You can't eat like an 18-year-old, forever without consequences. But that is, I think also something. And, I think there are people that are open to that message.
So what does the future hold for you? Do you see yourself still cycling for a number of years? Do you see doing RAGBRAI for a number of years? What do you think?
Well, I tell you, as I look at the experience of people that I ride with that are older than myself, I see maybe a recumbent in my future. I see maybe an electric bike in my future. And, but I think I'm also wise enough, to realize that, again, learning from the experience of some of the people that I've ridden with, this can be dangerous. And falling is a real problem for a senior, cyclist. The answer to that is don't fall. But,
right.
Easy to say. Hopefully I'll be able to maintain what I got. But hopefully I'll also be wise enough, to realize that if I start having a series of close calls, maybe I need to hang it up. Like I say, I ride with people that are in their 80s, and I struggle to keep up with some of those people.
John, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I appreciate your perspective, and hope that, moving forward here, you find some new adventures and and new places to ride and just continue to enjoy it.
That's the plan. That's the plan. Thank you.
All right. Take care now.
All right.
Bye. I'm so glad that I had that conversation with John. It has been many, many years since I was in Chicago, and it is hard to picture it as a bike-friendly city. If you look up the bike-friendly rankings of American cities, Chicago comes in 161 out of 163. This is in the People for Bikes rankings. The Chicago organization mentioned by John, Active Transportation Alliance, did an analysis of the ranking and shared that Chicago was hurt by the fact that cars are allowed to drive 30 miles per hour in the city. That is seen as an unsafe speed for cars and cyclists to share the road. The Active Transportation Alliance also reported that Mayor Brandon Johnson in July demonstrated a commitment to cycling when his administration revealed policy recommendations. One of those recommendations was to lower the speed limit to 20 miles per hour. I think it is safe to say that John is correct when he says that Chicago is on the way to becoming a top bike-friendly city. Hearing about the Bike the Drive event has put Chicago on my list of cities to visit with my bike. When I do so, I will take time to bike the drive, and I will also definitely be riding around the bottom of Lake Michigan to New Buffalo. What about you? I would love to hear if you think that Chicago is a good destination for a cycling vacation. Or what city are you most interested in biking around? You can find a link to the podcast Instagram and my email in the show notes. Please send me a message. I am also starting to be more active on Threads. It looks like there is a growing cycling community there. Wherever you live, whether it is bike-friendly or has a lot of room to improve in that realm, I hope you are finding safe and fun places to ride. And remember, age is just a gear change.